patai, me ko wai a haue. He uri no rahiri, taura moko i runga e. A tēnā tātou e te whare. Nei aku mihi mata koe atu ki a koutou i tēnei ata. E tū whakaiti, tēnei uri no ngā puhi nui tonu, no te aroa hoki mui a koutou. Oh, heck. I'm going to start today's kōrero with my mother's whakapapa, as a means of locating myself in a culturally appropriate manner, to illustrate the ways that one's identity can be a powerful and enduring aspect of self, and to emphasize the importance of these identity matters to our work as educators and kaitautoko. I do this as a means of asserting that every gifted Māori child has their own whakapapa, their own history and mana. I also do this to illustrate the pedagogical potential of whakapapa narratives for what can be taught and learned from and with gifted Māori students, their whānau, and the communities they belong to. So my mother, Sharon Kake, descends from iwi from throughout Te Taitokero, and I descend from gifted rangatira, such as Sir Heke Nuku Mai Busby of Muri Whenua, a world-renowned expert in bridge building, waka voyaging, traditional navigation, and seafaring. Papa Hek built 26 waka using mātauranga learned from other gifted waka builders like Tāpuhi Eruera. He knew to select trees that stood in a southwestern direction on a ridge facing the harsh weather. The side exposed to the rough weather was said to grow more slowly and would be denser and thus more suitable for the hull of a waka. The density of the wood at the bottom of the boat would add stability. After chopping the tree down, the heavier side could also be determined by floating it in water, because the heavier side would be at the bottom. Papa Hek was a gifted stargazer, a wayfinder, a weaver of traditional and contemporary engineering, scientific and navigational wisdoms. Rawiri Taiwhanga of Ngāti Tautahi and Ngāpuhi, in the middle there with the fabulous hat on, was one of many gifted rangatira from Te Taitokero who flourished economically during the early to mid-19th century. This time period was known as the golden age for Māori economically, because hapuan rangatira featured heavily in both domestic and international business and enterprise. Like many rangatira of the time, Taiwhanga held multiple positions in the early 1800s. He was one of Hongi Hike's contemporaries and participated in many war expeditions alongside him. Alongside participating in the Northern Wars, Taiwhanga was also honing his horticultural and agricultural knowledge, both on the Kirikiri mission station and then in Sydney with Samuel Marsden. Once back in Aotearoa, Taiwhanga worked at another mission station and grew a flourishing garden. 5 years later, Taiwhanga was simultaneously running a school and went into business himself, establishing a farm east of Te Kaikohekohe. Before long, Taiwhanga had successfully established a thriving farm and was selling produce, mostly butter, to merchants in the Bay of Islands. This made Taiwhanga Aotearoa's first commercial dairy farmer. He was industrious, enterprising, a gifted seeker of knowledge, and an astute businessman. And finally, I descend from Hine Amaru of Ngāti Hine, a rangatira of great mana who was famed for her fearless leadership of her iwi, her agricultural skills, and her tenacity. Hine Amaru's family left Waimamaku in search of fertile land, travelling from Te Taitamatane, which is the Hokianga, the west coast, the unpredictable coast, the coast that is said to embody that male element, to Te Taitamawahine, Peo Whairangi or the Bay of Islands, the gentle and idyllic east coast that is said to embody the female element. Here, Hine Amaru planted kumara seeds in 10 mounds, a gardening technique called ahu ahu. She planted the kumara in 3 different ways: Rāpiki with the stem facing east, Retu facing north, and Ratou facing west, to test the impact of the elements on the growth of the kumara. The following autumn, as the whānau returned from gathering seafood in Kohitane, Hineamaru stopped in at Paparata to check on the kumara. She was overjoyed to see abundant crops and immediately set about digging up the 10 mounds. After seeing and tasting the quality of the kumara, she declared that the land was perfect for permanent settlement. Hineamaru was a gifted scientist, driven by a desire to provide for her people. She engaged with centuries of mātauranga Māori and pūtaiao to find the best conditions for growing kumara. Now, I use my mother's whakapapa here to illustrate that if we want to educate in ways that accelerate gifted Māori student cultural pride, academic success, and engagement at school, and I suggest that those things can't be separated, we need programs of learning that acknowledge and celebrate the lofty aspirations, histories, and whakapapa of Māori students and the communities they carry on their shoulders with them to school every day. Sadly, I never learned anything about Ngāpuhi or our rich history of scientific endeavour or our iwi heroes at school, and I should have. The curriculum should have been localised to ensure that I learned as much about Māori entrepreneur Rawiri Taiwhanga or engineer and master navigator Heck Busby, as I did about physicist Sir Ernest Rutherford, suffragist Kate Shepherd, and British cartographer James Cook. We need to ensure that gifted Māori students know that they descend from greatness too. We need to arm them with a powerful and promising narrative about who they descend from, who they are now, and who they can become. A narrative that speaks back to the negative stereotypes and ruinous stories about Māori that they see every day in the mainstream media. Now in Aotearoa, we have an important educational policy called Kahiketea, which stipulates that all Māori students should have the opportunity to achieve educational success as Māori. However, my research has shown that many mainstream classrooms don't speak the language of Māori students. They really include their ways of knowing in the curriculum, and they almost never hold Māori ancestors up as role models of success or giftedness. And yet Māori know by way of our whakapapa, our cultural narratives, and our distinguished history of oratory, that we descend from a long lineage of giftedness. And the discourses within Māori communities themselves don't focus on academic underachievement and deficit either. Instead, the focus is on the strengths, wisdom, and opportunities all of our tamariki need to flourish. Māori families have told me that they want their children to learn in educational contexts that teach them that their ancestors were gifted, tenacious, courageous, and clever. These concepts are critical in the reshaping of a new curriculum for Aotearoa, which is happening as we speak. All Māori students must come to believe that their knowledge systems, language, and culture have as much value in modern times as they did in the past. We must continue to use whakapapa narratives to teach gifted Māori that they descend from greatness. Now, in the last 5 or 6 years, I've worked on a number of projects where we've explored this notion of giftedness, success, high achievement, thriving, and flourishing. And there are a number of concepts that have re-emerged constantly through about 3 different projects that I've been involved in. And one of the things that's emerged and that I'm going to talk to you about today is this notion of mana. Because when Māori parents talk about the success of their children, about what they want their children to be and how they want them to feel at school, they don't talk or use words like gifted, success, achievement. Generally, they're talking about their children walking in the world with mana, with their back straight, with a knowledge of who they are now, who they've descended from, and where they need to be a good parent and grandparent and great-grandparent in the future. And so alongside one of my mentors, Matua Angus McFarlane, we developed a model called the Mana model, which is a social psychological model that thinks about the ways students respond to social contexts. And the mana model has been developed and suggests that gifted Indigenous student thinking, behaviour is motivated by a desire to achieve a sense of mana tangata, a sense of place in the world where they are respected, where they are acknowledged for what they're good at doing, what their strengths and interests are. And alongside this, they also need to have self-efficacy, a belief that they can be successful, that they can thrive, that they can learn, purpose, pride, contribution, and belonging. And inside of this model, there are 5 key competencies, if you like, 5 different types of mana that are developed at school. Now, there are many types of mana in this world, and I'm not in any way suggesting that these are the only 5 we need to think about, but they're the 5 recurring themes that come through in the literature when we're talking to high-achieving students, their families, their teachers, and community members. Now, the most important type of mana, the absolute fundamental one, if you like, is the one right at the bottom there, the one that says mana whānau. Mana whānau is a child's sense that they belong to a collective, that there is somebody in their context who knows them, who cares about them, who recognises what they're good at, what their strengths and what their interests are. Without mana whānau, that deep sense of connection and belonging to others, the rest of the other types of mana cannot develop. Now, I might just say that today I'm talking about the mana model with gifted students in the middle of it, but actually this model can be used to wānanga, with whānau, with teachers, with community, to understand the different ways that schools or other organisations meet the needs of those communities, of those groupings. So just keep that in mind as I'm talking. So the first type of mana in the model is that of mana whānau, and that is our connectedness to others and collective agency. Now, gifted students need to believe that they occupy a central and valued position in their family, including their school family, so that they can develop a positive sense of self-esteem, self-concept, and efficacy. Now, having a central and valued position in their family, including their school family, means knowing that somebody in that context sees them, notices them, believes in them, and articulates their belief in the child explicitly. I can't emphasize enough across the research that I do how many students say to me, please tell me you are proud of me. Please tell me when you think I'm doing something right, because quite often the only time that students get feedback is when they're not doing something right. And they say that, many teachers, or actually teachers will say that, they send messages to students about how proud they are of them when they're doing the right things. But students say that they want that feedback, waha, from your mouth, through words. They want to be affirmed verbally. So this notion of mana whānau, this notion of connectedness to other people in a context, is fundamental for gifted student thriving. Many students are attending schools where negative stereotypes about Māori persist. So remember that there is often a binary in terms of identity construction for Māori in Aotearoa New Zealand. And the stereotype is that Māori cannot be both Māori and gifted, okay, that they are generally one or the other. And to be gifted means to be less Māori. We need to smash that binary for our young people. We need to illustrate to them in multiple ways that we can be both in this world, and that actually we descend from a long lineage of people who were both. So when students have a sense of mana whānau, they know that their families, their peers, their teachers, and members of the wider school community care about them. They feel welcome in a classroom. They feel loved in a classroom. They know what their academic strengths, and interests are. They can articulate them to you, to themselves, and to others. They know that they can contribute meaningfully to the world around them. They know how their gift applies in a context. They know how to be what Robert Sternberg calls successfully intelligent in the world. And they know that others recognize their innate mana tangata, their unique gifts and talents. And when students have demonstrate mana whānau, quite often in a classroom, you're going to see them articulate high expectations of themselves. They're going to feel more safe and connected to others. They quite often like school a lot more. They feel safe and protected in the school context. They're more likely to have healthy relationships with their peers and their teachers. They're more likely to ask for help and feedback where appropriate, and they believe that they make their family, their school, and others proud. The second type of mana that is discussed in the data is this notion of mana ukai pō, which is about belonging in relationship to place, to the spaces that we occupy, to the classrooms that we enter, to the lands that we walk upon. Now, ukai pō is a really beautiful word in te reo Māori. It's a lot like turanga waiwai, the place where we plant our feet. But ukai pō is a metaphor for contentedness, for belonging and for acceptance. U is a breast, kai is to feed, and pō is in the night. So ukai pō, the metaphor of ukai pō, suggests a mother and a child breastfeeding in the middle of the night, where your child isn't sick, of course, where everything is still and quiet, and you feel completely at ease in the world and where you're supposed to be. Now, when I drive to the far north and I get to the top of the Brynduin Hills, which is actually called Te Hurihanga Kāwharu, and I see the Whangarei Harbour in front of me, my whole body goes, I'm home. And that sense of ukai pō washes over me. Now, children want to have a sense of ukai pō at school and in other educational organisations. They want to walk into a classroom and know that they belong in that space, that they're safe in that space. Gifted students need to feel belonging and connection to their environment and others in that environment. Gifted students also thrive when they know that their culture, their history, and their belonging to this place and other places around the world is valued and important. Now, mana ukai pō develops in gifted students when they know that they belong somewhere. And many students come to school not knowing where they belong, and they want to have conversations with their teachers and with their peers about what it means to belong to a place, what it means to be committed and in relationship with others in a space. Now, one of the interesting things, I listened to a seminar by Moana Jackson last night, who was talking about what treaties are. And one of the things he said that really interests me was that the Latin word for treaty actually means to seek a relationship, to treat with others. And he talked about the Māori version for that being mahi tūhono, to bring people together. And so one of the things I learned last night is that treaties and or relationships, commitment to relationship, offer us a chance to make relationships, to keep relationships, and to grow relationships. And those things happen in particular places. So yes, our students need to feel like they belong in school, that they have a relationship to that place, and that they understand what their role and responsibility is in that place. They know about where they live and go to school. They know about the people that occupied the lands before they came to be there in that school. Who were the rangatira that walked those lands? What are the stories of the local maunga, of the local awa? Do our students feel proud to come from their little community in Te Koutu Rotorua, which is where I grew up? Do they know the stories of that place? Can they talk about those stories to others? And I guess with the renewed emphasis on, new emphasis on localized curriculum in many schools, this is an exciting opportunity for students to learn about the Māori history of a place, but also how other people have come to occupy those spaces and what is needed to ensure in that space that we treat each other with kindness, that we acknowledge each other's right to self-determine our futures, and that we live in relationship with each other. Mana ukai po also develops when gifted students know that their giftedness, their cultural knowledge, and that their history are important and valued by others, and that they feel connected to people in that context. They also demonstrate mana ukai po when they articulate that they feel proud to go to their school or whatever other organisation they're attending. When they understand how their actions affect others, when they actively participate in school activities, when they can talk about their whakapapa, history, language, and culture, and when they can compare and contrast different points of view respectfully. The third type of mana that is discussed in the model is that of mana motuhake. And mana motuhake is when gifted students have a secure sense of cultural identity and positive role models that they can relate to and aspire to be like. There's a great body of literature that comes out of social psychology in America. And one of the things that they talk about, or a lady called Daphne Oyserman talks about, is this notion of embedded achievement. And embedded achievement is when we associate being a member of our group, whatever that group might be, our gender group, our ethnic group, when we believe that our group membership involves achieving in academics, and that success and academic striving are key components of being a member of that group. And they also believe that their success at school or in academics enables other people to be successful at school. So embedded achievement is really important to gifted Māori students. They need to believe that they are successful because they're Māori, not despite being Māori. They need to see that their language, their culture, and their identity are an asset in the world, and that actually other people's cultures, identities, and languages are assets to them too. So mana motuhake develops in gifted students when they know who they are and where they come from. So this is a recurring theme coming through in all of the data, that they have positive role models that they aspire to be like. When students can articulate who it is in their world that makes them feel good about themselves, that models particular qualities or behaviours or motivations and aspirations that they can relate to and aspire to as well. They know and can talk about many people from their cultural group who have achieved success, and they know how to manage their time to get important work completed. Now, one of the things I ask across a number of projects that I do, one of the questions that's come to be the most important question I can ask students and whānau and teachers when I'm working with them is, who is a role model in your life? Somebody who makes you aspire to greater things. And if you could describe that person in 5 words, what 5 words would you use? And quite often this gives us a real sense of what, for Māori students, Māori success is Māori means. It tells us what drives students to do well at school, who they want to be in the future. So for example, one of the stories I tell often, and I apologise for those of you who've heard me tell this particular anecdote before, is one young man that I spoke to about his role models. And he said to me, my koro, my grandfather, is my role model. My koro is a scientist. My koro is the best pig hunter in Murupara. And when he goes pig hunting, everyone on our street gets a kai. And when I said to him, so tell me about your koro, what 5 words would you use to describe your koro? And this young man said, well, and this man was in year 12 in a secondary school in Rotorua. And he said to me, well, my koro is a scientist, because you can't be a good pig hunter without understanding the behaviour of pigs and of pig dogs. My koro understands those things, so he's a scientist. My koro also understands the ngahere, the forest, and he's very cognizant of the weather, because you need to be aware of those things when you're a pig hunter. My koro is fit and healthy, and you have to be to chase a pig through the forest for half a day. My koro is humble and generous. Now, that young man went on to be an engineer. He's working back home in Rotorua, acting as a bit of a conduit between the iwi and the city council. He's a civil engineer. He bought a house for his nana and koro to live with him in Rotorua. So the things he talked about, when he was talking about his koro, he wasn't just talking about pig hunting. He was talking about the qualities, the characteristics of his grandfather that he wanted to emulate in his own life. So pay attention to who children love. Pay attention to who they talk about when they're talking about their weekends, not just what they're talking about. And remember that sometimes children will talk about role models that we don't think necessarily are the best role models for them. But it's not about who they talk about. It's actually about what they do in those children's lives that's most important. Because a number of children will say things like, my uncle, who's the president of the Black Power, is my role model. And many teachers take a deep breath when they hear that. But then when you go on to ask, what is it about your uncle that you love so much? How do they make you feel? And they'll say, well, my uncle is the only person that comes to my rugby games on the weekend. Or my uncle is the only person who makes my mum laugh when most of the time she cries. What they're actually talking about is their uncle's empathy, their uncle's leadership in the whānau, their uncle's ability to notice what children need and respond. So role models are critical. I encourage you all, every kaiako on this webinar, to ask that question of the children in your akomanga, in your classroom. Ask their whānau too, because you learn something about whānau, about families when you ask whānau members to write something for their child about a role model in their lives. Now, gifted students demonstrate mana motuhake when they feel proud to be a member of their cultural group, their gender group, their religious group, whatever it might be. For Māori students, it's generally their cultural group. When they can communicate with clarity and confidence, especially when it comes to their goals and aspirations for the future. They come to school regularly, on time and ready to learn. They can set goals and complete tasks to the best of their ability. They use creativity and imagination to problem solve and innovate. And they're able to self-assess and make improvements to their own learning because they know who they are, they know where they want to be in the future, they have other people in their lives that have modeled that journey for them, and they're on the pathway to self-determining their own future, with the support, of course, of their peers and kaiako. The fourth type of mana is that of mana tū. And mana tū are a collection of a range of different social psychological competencies that enable students to manage themselves in a range of different contexts. And we know that we don't just remain the same person when we go from our home to our work environment, into school environments, into church environments, or marae cultural environments. The ways we speak and interact necessarily change across those different contexts. And students who have mana tū know this, okay? So they understand and need skills to deal with difference and adversity. Skills such as, and this is not a complete list, but most importantly, courage, tenacity, self-discipline, humility, self-reflection, and kindness. Now, mana tū develops when gifted students know that they can learn and be successful. So academic efficacy is critical. Even for the most gifted students in the world, they need reminders about the things that they are good at, about the skills they bring to, each new task that they're doing, that they're not starting from zero. In fact, they already have these parts of the process for learning nailed, because they came to the task with particular funds of knowledge, with particular skills and metacognitive skills, if you like, that will enable them to complete it. They know what they're good at. They also know what they're not good at. So they're able to utilize their strengths, but also compensate for their weaknesses by working with others, by doing extra work in a particular area of the task. They know that they can achieve their goals. And this is particularly true for Māori students who say it over and over again in the data that I analyse, that they can achieve their goals with hard work, with determination, and a never give up attitude. They demonstrate mana tū when students respect that everyone learns differently, that everybody comes to a task with different understandings of the content, with different mechanisms for making sense of the things that they don't know, and with different endpoints. Everybody has a different endpoint for a task, something that they want to achieve, that they want to understand better. So students who have, gifted Māori students who have manatū understand that. They understand that in order to learn, they need to get on with others. And in order to get on with others, they need to be a generous, kind, and humble classmate. They need to show gratitude when learning from others who think about the world differently from them. That needs to be respected, encouraged. And they're self-disciplined and make good choices. Now, the last type of mana that is discussed in this model is that of mana tangatarua, which is when students acquire or desire a diverse knowledge base and skill set. So we know that gifted students need the skills, knowledge, and confidence to navigate multiple worlds with mental wellness, which is incredibly important, cultural competence, and an inclusive mindset. Our babies don't belong in just one world, okay? They want to understand what the Māori world brings, what exists here in Te Ao Māori. They also live next door to a Samoan family, and they want to understand the languages, the protocols and traditions of those families as well. And as New Zealand, Aotearoa New Zealand becomes increasingly ethnically diverse, our need to acquire mana tangatarua will become more pressing. So mana tangatarua develops in gifted students when, in particular, now there are more things than this, but these are the two things that come up the most, when they know that they have something to teach others about themselves, about their place, about their family, about their strengths and their interests, but when they also know that everyone else has something to offer and teach them as well. So it's when our students understand that they are both a tuakana, an older sibling, somebody who can be a mentor to others, but also a taina, a younger sibling, a learner, somebody who has to learn from and listen to others. So that kind of balance is critical to students acquiring mana tangatarua. Now, gifted students who demonstrate mana tangatarua will be more interested in learning about other cultures and communities. They're more likely to understand and reflect on Māori history, especially the history of their local area, where they belong, where they feel connected, the places where their families go, live, and perhaps go for Christmas holidays or school holidays all of the time. They actually want to know about those places and why it is that their families have chosen them. They have some ideas about what they'd like to do when they leave school. Many of the gifted secondary students that I've spoken to already have quite a clear idea about what they want to do when they get to university or Unitec, or when they go out into work context. And those that don't know a specific job that they want to do quite often know the field that they want to work in. I really enjoy science, particularly freshwater science. So I want to do something where I'm working with my iwi, testing the quality of the water, making sure that communities understand what the different quality levels mean, etc. So they're very clear about who they want to be in the future, and they have some idea, some kind of ability to back map from that imagined future. So if they want to be a freshwater scientist, they want to work with the iwi, do they know other freshwater scientists in their rohe or in their iwi who do that kind of work that they could go and talk to about pathways? Do they understand the kinds of courses they might need to do in universities or other or apprenticeships with iwi organisations that would help them to achieve that job? What kinds of subjects at high school do they need to make sure that they're taking so that they have the full suite of curriculum knowledge to thrive in that job? So those kinds of things are what I'm talking about when I talk about back mapping. Quite often, these students talk about the fact that they try hard to pronounce all people's names and place names properly. They know that people's names are important, that they have mana, that they have a whakapapa. And so they try really hard to pronounce other people's names properly. They're open to new ideas and doing things differently, to giving things a try. This, of course, won't be true across all subject areas. All children show reluctance in particular subject areas, but the children who were described as having mana tangata by their families and by their teachers were more likely to give things a go, to take some risks in their learning, and aware the outcome of those risks, be they positive or negative. They make decisions with moral courage and integrity. And by that I mean, because they know who they are, they know why they will or will not do particular things. Generally, they're talking about peer pressure to engage in particular social activities at school, but also in terms of learning in the classroom environment, things that they do and don't believe in. And of course, the most important thing when this is true is for them to be able to articulate why and just justify their perspectives with reference to family beliefs, cultural understandings, and so forth. But they talked a lot about the importance of having a moral compass, of having a social justice perspective on various opportunities to learn in the school and context. And they're mindful of the values and needs of others in the school and context. Now, I want to, before I talk to this slide, one of the things I want to suggest to you is that when thinking about these different types of mana, it's really important to gauge student perspective, to take these different types of mana and the descriptors for them, and to actually speak to students about, so how do you experience mana ukai po, for example, in this learning context? What is it that makes you feel like you're learning about this place? You're learning about the history of people in this classroom and other people and other communities that occupy the place where our school is. What would you like to learn more about to develop mana ukai po? We can also ask families that the families of students, and of course, really importantly, kaiako. If we don't do this work with kaiako, how are we expecting kaiako to do it with their students? Do kaiako feel a sense of belonging and place in the school? Do they feel like they're a member of the collective? Do they feel like they have the diverse skill sets and knowledges to really understand the funds of knowledge that families bring into the school and context, and how to use them most effectively? What is needed for them to develop that particular type of mana? So the mana model is a model that can be used by a range of different people in educational contexts. And what my research tells me is that Māori gifted students in particular, but I would argue all students, need to develop those competencies, the competency of connectedness to others, of belonging to place, of embedded achievement, knowing, having a sense of efficacy and positive concept about who they are, developing the qualities or attributes of courage and tenacity, the ability to stick at things, even when they get tough, the really important personal characteristic of humility, and how humility helps us to make and sustain relationships, build and sustain relationships in schooling context. And then mana tangatarua, how to listen to, respect and respond to diverse perspectives on issues and in our learning across the board. So I want to end today's kōrero with further stories. To conclude, I want to leave you with some additional counter-narratives to the one my daughter reads about herself online, in newspapers and in school books. So my father descends from the Te Arawa Waka and the 8 iwi based in and around Lake Rotorua, in particular Ngāti Whakauē. Today, I remember the deeds of my gifted tupuna, including the scholarly Makariti Papakura, the first Māori woman to attend Oxford University in the 1920s to complete her ethnographic dissertation on child development. Now, Makariti Papakura was a guide, a scholar, and a writer. Makariti was very little when she was taught to recite her whakapapa and the history of her mother's iwi, Tūhaurangi Ngāti Wāhiao. Makariti would become an accomplished guide and entertainer. She was beautiful, gifted, and determined. In 1926, Makariti became a student at Oxford University, where she studied anthropology. Her thesis was published 8 years after her death and was called The Old Time Māori. It tells of the life and customs of Te Arawa people, particularly those customs related to child rearing. The Old Time Māori was the first published work of a Māori scholar. It was said that the secret to her success was being proud and confident in both the Pākehā and Māori worlds. She is remembered for her innovation, her scholarship and compassion. She exemplifies mana tū, mana motuhake, and mana tangata rua. In the middle there is Koro Te Hiko Te Rangi Hōhepa, a highly respected Te Arawa kaumātua who was versed in tribal whakapapa. He, like many of us, was raised by his grandparents and trained in the traditional forms of whakapapa, genealogy, whaikōrero, oratory, karakia, incantations, and waiata mō tiatia, traditional chants or poetry. Perhaps even more importantly, he was known for his gentle, peacemaking nature and for being very humble, which is a revered trait in Te Ao Māori. He exemplifies, to my mind, mana ukaipo and mana tū. And lastly, the carving at the end there, which is of my tupuna Te Ao Kapurangi. When she was just a girl, she was captured by Hauraki, a Ngāpuhi leader, and forced to marry him. Hauraki took her back to the Bay of Islands, where she lived among them in the north. Years later, Ngāpuhi returned to the Bay of Plenty and found themselves at war with Te Ao Kapurangi's people. Hearing that Ngāpuhi were coming to fight them, some of the Te Arawa people fled to Makoia Island in search of safety. Te Ao Kapurangi was desperate to save her relatives, so she begged the Ngāpuhi leader, Hongihika, to show them mercy. He said that he would only save the people who could pass between Te Ao Kapurangi's thighs at the time of battle, because the space between a woman's legs are tapu, so if people passed between them, they too would become tapu, and the warriors couldn't touch them. Now, Te Ao Kapurangi was a clever and brave woman, and when the time came for the battle to begin, she jumped ashore and ran to Tamata Kapua, the wharenui of her whānau. She climbed up onto the roof of the building and sat with her legs on either side of the ridgepole. She shouted out as strongly as she could for everyone to run inside the building so that they might be saved. Many people flocked inside. The Ngāpuhi warriors were at a loss as they had let them enter because of the agreement Te Ao Kapurangi had made with Hongihika. Te Ao Kapurangi saved many lives that day, and she's remembered for her courage and resourcefulness. She exemplifies mana whānau and mana tū. There is a well-known Te Arawa whakatauki or proverb that refers to Te Ao Kapurangi's act of courage and is often used when there is a large gathering in our wharenui or meeting houses. The proverb says, "Anō ko te whare whawhao a Te Ao Kapurangi, like the crowded house of Te Ao Kapurangi." Nō reira, e te whare whawhao o Te Ao Kapurangi, e te hunga e whakarongo ana i te ata nei. Koe rā te o purepure o tōku nei whakapapa, o tōku nei whakaro, o tōku nei wawata mō ngā tamariki mokopuna. Therefore, to the crowded house of Te Ao Kapurangi, everyone on this webinar today, to everyone who is listening, I've laid out the multifaceted nature of my whakapapa, of my genealogy, of my thoughts, and of my aspirations for gifted Māori students. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ka huri.